Promise Fellow Supervisors. I'm Noam Wiggs, and I'm the Training Development and Evaluation Director, and I'm going to be talking through the evaluation part of my job, and essentially all the reporting and checks throughout the year. So just to jump into things, we'll get through all this, essentially trying to do some baseline of Knack, what data is collected, what schedule, feedback systems. So off the bat, students that are being served by a Promise Fellow, they need kind of your basic census level demographic information. We have very few sites that don't do an SEI, but if you are one of those sites, which is almost exclusively St. Paul Public, everyone should be doing an SEI as well. And that would be something that you've already communicated with me with realities that you face. The other piece that I'd share here is if you're a community-based site, almost never in my experience do you get MARS numbers or the state ID numbers. And your Promise Fellow, if you are a school-based site or and you do have a MARS number access, your Promise Fellow might not know where to find that. So offer guidance in those. And we use that data periodically to reach out to MDE and try to see how many students have ultimately graduated, because you could have been served in 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th grade. And our goal, or our long-term goal, is graduation, but we won't know. And then on the right is all like the optional ones. That's all up to you. That is not in the data agreement that you've already signed with us. I'd say most often sites share the first two, if the student's an English learner or if they're a student with an IEP. Oops, went too far. And this is what it looks like in Knack. So essentially it is very databasey looking like. Just drag stuff out of your way so that way you can see everything. Helps if it actually works. Going in and selecting everything, and this is the only thing I'd highlight here is those optional pieces. The choices is yes, no, unknown, or the site just doesn't disclose. All right, I'm going to keep going. So here's the qualifiers, and all students do need to qualify. I will have more in-depth information when we do the live training, where I'm giving like feedback files for everybody on how last year looked. By the nature of COVID, we weren't going to, we had no desire to make it so students weren't getting support. And I don't know, especially attendance data was all over the board last year as we're trying to figure out how to do this in remote reality. So there's a bunch of students that didn't qualify. And so I'd like to work with all of us just to do our best just to figure out how to get students to qualify, whether it's off of attendance or the student engagement instrument, aka that attitudes and perception of school. And you don't need to have all your students off the bat. I'd expect that as, with your start date, the first couple weeks, like a Promise Fellow might get 15 of their students. But depending on how your support structures are going, many of you, if you're returning, have good cohort structure, and, they might already have like 20 to 30 of their students off the bat. If you're a full-time person, everything shifts down if you're less. But that's my backwards way of saying that you don't need to add everyone off the bat. So if your Promise Fellow has 10 students and after quarter one, trimester one, you want to add students, cool, that's perfect. Either way, they need to qualify. Then the information that's needed on a weekly basis is having your Promise Fellow track their support time. And that really is used. Essentially, our program exists that a student needs 90 days, aka 12 weeks of support in order to have positive change. So this is both like a holistic thing and a data fidelity thing. Like if they're not tracking their support, there's no reason that I would expect positive outcomes from a student that doesn't get enough support, which can holistically be a good thing, or it could be something along the lines of coaching for data or updating data for your Promise Fellow. WOOP goal setting when we get there. If you've already done the PF activity training, a little bit more, about a month and a week or so into their service, they'll be trained on that, and they'll be expected to be touching base with them. And then every quarter or trimester, whatever your institution is on, they should be updating, attendance and work completion for that period of time, and doing a great story. And then the student engagement instrument, or SEI, is just a pre or post. Ideally, it happens within their first month of service, give or take, and then in the final month, before the end of the school year, if it goes all the way to the end of the school year. So baseline expectations. This depends on the position you have. So if you're a 40-hour-a-week person, it's 30 hours or 30 people, and then it just goes prorated down. And this might be actually your first visual. We are doing weekly start dates this year. I worked with ops folks in order to try this experiment because, I don't know, just hopefully helps everyone. Having people start as soon as they possibly can, they get more positive chances for hours. And then here's like the data baseline deadlines by that. So I will make sure that I send out reminders the week prior, and then essentially every 2 weeks I'll be sending some version of feedback to your person after their baseline. And this is where they should have that baseline attendance, work completion, if possible SEI, the amount of interventions, all of that updated. And then as you go throughout your year, whether you're a quarter or trimester, essentially I have deadlines that are 2 to 4 weeks after each quarter or trimester. So that way it should make it so your reality does not get in the way, or your deadlines for teachers, things get done. So thus it is accessible data. Please note, if you're a community-based site, it often takes longer. I often try to have as many disclaimers as possible, like just be in touch with me around what's possible, because I will hold people to their own deadlines. So if November 26th happens and you're a community-based site and you won't get data until December 15th, I have my own system that I'll just have you set your own deadline, and then I'll be in touch with you after that just to see and hold you accountable to that. And then I also said great stories are due with these. And a great story is essentially, it's the qualitative data. Even though I do the eval part of my job, it's not a fun story to say that somebody's attendance went from 72% to 78%. Like, I think that's an awesome story, but that doesn't share all of like the positive work, love, care, etc. that went into it. So every quarter or trimester we'll ask your Promise Fellow just to kind of share a snapshot of impact that they've had, memorable moments, things like that. And once again, we'll send reminders. Here's Knack. So here's what Knack looks like. Essentially, after they build in their baseline, every week they should be updating the amount of minutes of support that they're doing with students. And then after they've had their 101 training and they've had WHOOP goal setting training, like literally saying like a progress-based thing, yes or no, have I checked in with the student on like what they're currently working on, what their current goal is, or help them set themselves a new goal. And I'll give feedback on this throughout the year. So this is the piece that also needs to happen, because the student needs enough support in order to have positive change. And my timeline on pieces, after baseline, essentially I will pull data. Baseline's due on Friday. The next Monday I'll pull it. And either by the end of that day, Monday, or early Tuesday, I will send everybody, hey, here's what you have. Here's what's not there. So you have attendance, and I have an example here in a second. Please update, or sending affirmations. And then this will happen on like a cyclical basis. Every 2 weeks or so, I will reach out and say, hey, here's how things are going. Please update, or send them an affirmation. Thanks for doing your updates. And like I said, here's an example. This is from somebody that started about a month and a week in, give or take. So this is a pretty accurate what you could expect for the first round of feedback. Somebody that had 14 students, And half of them were updated for attendance and work completion, aka their progress in the 2 classes that they're tracking. And I haven't had a chance to do SEI because I don't have relationships necessarily yet, and I'm just starting that process now. And so I'll give feedback also at the bottom on the amount of like support that you've done. Like, your average student's gone a week of support, and our goal is that as best as possible, that students get 12 plus 30-minute weeks of support. So you will get these, you'll be CC'd on them, and I would truly appreciate if you could, just touch in with your weekly or bi-weekly check-in. Like, hey, I saw progress, cool for the pieces that you got done. What's your plan for the pieces that need to happen? And then we will be doing site visits. If you're returning in the same fashion that we did this last year, there are virtual and Promise Fellow leaders. Will and Maya are returning. So we have 2 fantastic folks that served in this role last year. Essentially, they will be doing check-ins in November and December with Promise Fellows around how implementing Promise Fellow activities, students, creating the student focus list, hours, coaching, all those pieces. And I will be doing the same thing with you as supervisor. And if there's anything that needs to be figured out, we'll all sit at the same virtual table and figure it out. And once again, we'll do those in May, and I try to double dip and try to get as much like pertinent info. So that way, if there's a thoughtful amount of things that can be talked about, that we just figure it out and do it all at one time. So I will be virtually seeing you relatively soon. And then kind of finally from the Promise Fellow side, and then I'll show you on the supervisor side, like I said, to make sure that I said this in the PF activities pre-recorded, but essentially expect people to be thoughtful around their relationships and like what they're using in order to establish them. So I will be doing check-ins every meeting with your Promise Fellows and giving them feedback kind of on their like relationship journey. So that way they can set their own goals in order to better support students. And as of course, there's always going to be some like operations or things that gets included in that, just to make sure that we're asking thoughtful questions at the right time. And for you all, after we see each other for the live virtual training, I'll be essentially sending you your check-in, which you'll have on every supervisor training, where for this first one, it's really like onboarding and orientation. Of the things that need to happen or training that needs to happen, what do you have a plan for? And then effectively it's a process-based thing. If you said, nope, I don't know what I'm doing there, you can either ask for help or, share that I'm going to do X, Y, and Z to make sure that I have that ready for my Promise Fellow. So that will be sent following your first live virtual. And with that, I'm just going to wrap everything up. If you have any questions, please ask them. Otherwise, thank you so much.